Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Scumdogs Kennel. Welcome to Tonight we're going to be talking about fairy lore, but first let me show off some artwork from my own upcoming graphic novel, Scumdogs. Okay. Here we go. Here's my extreme 90s cover. This cover I did to harken back to the comic books of the 90s. Here we go. Here's my extreme 90s. Sorry about that again. As I said, this is the cover to my graphic novel. Looks pretty good, huh? Now, the name of my graphic novel is Scumdogs. It's a parody of cartoons, and stuff like that. It's a parody of cartoons we all love and hold dear and stuff like that. Cartoons like He-Man and Transformers, those kinds of cartoons. It's in the future, to explain what the Scumdogs are, the main characters, they're a bunch of villains. And in the future, there's such a thing known as the Scumdog Sports. The Scumdog Sports is sporting events held with superhuman monsters as athletes. See, they're called scum and dogs because they're scum and dogs for trading in their humanity for superpowers, for money. For fame and fortune to become big pro athletes. So not exactly the nicest kinds of guy. The classic pro athlete nowadays only cares about money and basically wants to get as much money he can for the deal for playing sports to entertain people. The classic idea of the very rotten star and stuff like that. Rotten guy who plays as an athlete and stuff like that. That's the idea. What happens is they get banned from sports, so they decide to take over the world because, well, they're not going to get money from being paid for it. They're just going to take it anyway, or they're take over the world. Now, this cover has all the characters, well, almost all the characters that will be appearing in my graphic novel. Now, the two main characters are Deathmug and Buick Starpoon. Deathmug is the purple guy with the metal mask. He's a parody of, Cobra Commander and Serpentor from G.I. Joe. Like Cobra Commander, he's got a metal mask, and like Serpentor, he's got gold on him. And he's purple, like the Shredder from Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Well, he's a you get the idea. Well, his archenemy, Buick Starpoon, the guy with the pink pompadour hair, he's basically a G.I. Joe parody, as well as a parody of the space hero kind of character as well, like James T. Kirk or Buzz Lightyear, those kinds of guys. And notice the uniform he's wearing. Anyone with a similar uniform to Buick Starpoon is on the same team as him. Now, Deathmug, I should get back to over there. He's an arrogant, overbearing villain and stuff like that. He always monologues to his enemies when he has them cornered, telling them his plans because he's that stupid. When he has them captured and at his mercy instead of just killing them and stuff like that. His ego is gigantic, but, now let's talk about Buick Starpoons, whose ego is just as big. And he's your classic arrogant space captain hero, or rather arrogant military type hero. And, all of the guys in the similar uniforms to him on this cover, as I said, are all part of his team in the Space Forces. And all of them are G.I. Joe parodies, and they all have a military specialty. Buick Starpoon's military specialty is that he's a captain in the Space Forces. While this guy over here with a mohawk, his name is Beach Pounder. This guy over here with the mohawk, his name is Roadhog. His specialty is that he's an army guy. He's part of the army, and now he's part of Buick Starpoon's team in the Space Forces. While this bald guy with a gun down here, in the blue uniform, his name is Beach Pounder. His military specialty is that he's a Marine. While this guy in the red uniform, firing his weapons and stuff like that at the Scumdogs, his name is Blast Tank. His military specialty is that he's a heavy vehicle specialist, a tanker. Now, this is a pretty good cover. It's one of 3 different variant covers you'll be able to buy, or rather back on Indiegogo when my Indiegogo goes live. Over here is Girl Friday. By the way, folks, hit that like button for me. It really helps me fight the algorithm, as well as please go share this video on social media. Girl Friday is the second command of Buick Starpoon. She was put on the Wild Rangers. That's the name of Buick Starpoon's team in the Space Forces, because while the Wild Rangers go and fight the Scumdogs and save the day, they're just highly destructive idiots that destroy everything around them. So she was put on the Wild Rangers by her superiors in the Space Forces to basically keep them in line and make sure they do their jobs. And she hates her jobs because Girl Friday feels like her career in the military is over and that she's now just a babysitter. Now we're going to look at Death Mug's henchmen. Right? Because like in all 80s cartoons, the main villain, his henchmen, the guys who do his bidding, they're always total idiots, and these are Death Mug's henchmen. The blue guy with the top hat is Murdermouth, and the pink guy down here is Sloppy. They're a couple of idiots that can't possibly do anything right, and they destroy everything they touch. They're a parody of every henchman from an 80s cartoon. And that's what we have here. Now here we have Hair Metal Doctor. He's a parody of Dr. Mindbender from G.I. Joe, a mad scientist. But my mad scientist here is crossed over with a hair metal musician, because I thought it'd be awesome to have that as a villain in my graphic novel. Hair Metal Doctor thinks of all the mad gadgets and machines the scumdogs use to try and take over the world. He does it while rocking out and just having fun. Here we have the Miss Breasty Melons. Miss Breasty Melons is the Baroness is basically a parody of the Baroness from G.I. Joe. But unlike the Baroness, she's a party girl who wants to have fun. She only became a villain because she wanted to have fun and stuff. So she's basically just doing this. She just became a villain and stuff like that. Now, the Hair Metal Doctor pinup and the Miss Bursting Melons pinup will be included in my graphic novel with other pinups for you all to get when you go and back it on Indiegogo. But these pinups will also be out from Crypto Fashion on t-shirts as soon as I'm able to make them. Okay, folks? We looked at that. It's fun. Now, as I said, we're going to be looking at fairy lore tonight. Fairies and stuff like that. We're just going to look at legends and have a little fun. Let me go over here. Is anyone watching us? Have you guys hit that like button for me? Well, if you have not hit that like button for me, folks, please do so, as well as please go and share this video on social media. Where to look at first? Oops. That here. All right. What to look at first, huh, folks? Well, we can go to Indiegogo real quick to see if there are any new Indiegogos up. Looks like we have a few new ones up. Maybe I'll look at them as well. Maybe. All right. What to go for first? I think the fairy. Let's see. We're going to be talking about fairy lore and fairies tonight, as well as stories of people encountering them. The Fairy Investigation Study looks at the mysterious phenomenon of deathbed fairy sightings. Maybe. Or we could look at the Truth of Danan of Ireland. In the mythological cycle of Irish mythology, the other world, and were a magical race who became known as the Cedar Fairy folk in Irish folklore. They descend from the people of Nirhada, who were the second wave of settlers. The arrival of the Truth of Danan. When the Firbog ruled Ireland, their king Ercrad Mac Eric had a dream for telling him about the arrival of a group of ships. Led by King Nurda, a fleet of 300 ships of the Truth of Danan arrived in Ireland. When they came ashore, they set fire to their ships to hide their arrival, but also to stop themselves from having to retreat from Ireland. Smoke from these fires could be seen for miles and filled the sky for 3 days and 3 nights. For a treasure of the Truth of Danan. The Truth of Danan came from 4 mystical cities of islands in the north called the Philindids, Maros, and fairies, where they learned the skill of wisdom and and magic. From these cities, they brought 4 treasures to Island: Dagda's cauldron, the spear of Li, the stone of Fal, and the sword of light of Nuda. Each of these treasures held special properties, such as Dagda's cauldron that would leave no company unsatisfied. No battle was ever sustained against the spear of Lu or him who held it. No one ever escaped from the sword of light of Nuda once it was drawn from its teeth, and the stone of Fal, stone of Ireland, would cry out under kings of Ireland. When the Truth of Dedanin arrived in Ireland, the Firbog were the leaders of the land. The Truth of Dedanin marched to the west coast and demanded half of the Irish land. The Firbog refused to give them any of Ireland in the first battle of Magturd, and Sewer. The Firbog were defeated and fled Ireland forever. During the battle, Mature, King Nuda of the Truth of Dedanin, had his right hand severed, so the kingship was handed to Eric Bruce, who was a ruthless leader and oppressed the Truth of D because of his ancestry. When Nuda had his hand replaced with a hand made from silver, he took back leadership from Bress, which angered him. Bress turned to help from the king of the Fomorians, Bowler of the Evil Eye, who agreed to build a large army. King Nuda assigned a new member to Lu to lead his army into battle against the Fomorians. Lu was a young man who was skilled with the spear. During the second battle in Matura, King Nuda was killed by Bowler, but Lu, who was Barla's grandson, killed him with his slingshot. Lu fired his slingshot at Bowler. Him in the eye, causing chaos within the ranks of the Fomorians, allowing the Truth of Dedanin to win the battle. Briss was captured and his life was spared as long as he taught the Truth of Dedanin how to plow, sow, and reap. A third battle took place when the Milesins invaded Ireland and faced 3 goddesses, Benba and Fodla. Their husbands, Mac Gruel and Mac Kurt and Mac Green, were all kings of Truth of Dedanin. Requested a truce after 3 days of battle. The Milesins agreed to the truce and anchored offshore. The Truth of D cast a magical spell, creating a fierce storm in an attempt to destroy or drive the Milesians away from Ireland. This plan failed when the Milesin poet by the name of Minkin was able to cast a verse to calm the sea. Once the sea calmed, the Milesians came back to shore and defeated the Truth of Dedanin at Tudlu. How the Truth of Dedanin became fairy folk. Ireland was divided between the 2 factions. The Milesians would stay above ground, the Truth of D below ground, into the city Mounds, deprived of offerings and affection. The Dedanin shriveled and withered until they became the little people of the fairy folk. Well, okay. So we learned that. The Truth of Dedanin, the fairy folk. It's just one story and one tale to tell about what is going on with the fair folk. Now, let's look at some other stories. Or we can also call them the Ultra-Terrestrials, creatures that have been misidentified as aliens, when in reality, what we are seeing in their alien spaceships and their ships are not from outer space, but come from here on Earth, from some place either within the Earth or maybe on the Earth. Could it be, folks? Maybe. But this is one hell of a good story to be listening to, isn't it? Now, let's go over here. Have you guys, anyone watching us? We've been doing this for a while. Have you guys hit that like button for me? Yes, you have. If you have not hit that like button for me, folks, please do so. It really helps me fight the algorithm. As you can see, there are various tales of the fairies and stuff like that. It's things that come along. Right? From fairies to aliens and a contactee. Let's see. Vegetable men, space fairies, and other truly bizarre alien encounters. Should I go for this one? Or maybe I should assert bizarre tales of people abducted by fairies. Maybe I should go alien pancakes. Aliens, pancakes. Strangers Connection. Yeah, Strangers Connection. Let's go for this one. In April 61, a UFO encounter occurred in Eagle River, Wisconsin, that many researchers of the flying saucer phenomenon have seen fit to relegate to the domains of hoaxing or fantasy. Oh yes, we're talking about the guy who met these aliens who talked in Polish and served him pancakes, and they came out of the spaceship. Yeah, they could very well be. I've told you this story before. This is actual written account of it, folks. I think we should look at it. The flying saucer phenomenon have been seen. Yeah, it just might have been something else. It was the late morning, April 18th, and the tasty brunch of a of a of a man named Joe was about to be rudely interrupted by visitors from another world. Joe Simonton, a chicken, a farmer Simonton was about to eat when he was shaken to his core by the thundering sound of what he thought was a jet plane flying low overhead. It was not. He raced outside and was confronted by nothing less than a flying saucer around 30 feet in diameter hovering above his head. We could continue reading this, or I could read it later. I kind of want to look at something else after that Timothy Dannon story. I can go to this story a bit later on. I want to look at something else first. Or should I look at that now? Finish it off. I should probably. Yeah, I really looked at Dannon, so let's just finish this off. Simonton can only stand and stare in awe as a doorway opened and a man approached him. He and his comrades inside the UFO were all short in height, around 5 feet at the most, and were outfits similar to military jumpsuits. The completely mute man approached Simonton and with what clearly resembled a terrestrial jug and managed to make Simonton understand that he wanted water. Simonton quickly obliged as a thank you. The aliens gave Simonton a hot plate of what appeared to be small pancakes fresh off of E.T.'s grill. Yes, really, it was a good trade-off for the farmer. The leader of the group gave a strange salute and returned to the craft, which shot away into the heavens. It's important to note that Joe Simmons' account is not a standalone one when it comes to pancakes type food of the weird kind. Walter Yealing Evans once was an authority on fairy lore and the author of a still cherished 1911 book, Fairy Faith, Celtic countries. He told an intriguing story that was somewhat parallels that of Joe Simonton. It involved around an Irishman, one Pat Finney, who received a strange visit from a diminutive woman, asked for oatmeal. Evans once said Patty had so little that he was ashamed to offer it, so he offered her some potatoes instead, but she wanted oatmeal, and then he gave her all that he had. She told him to place it back in the bin till she should return for it. This he did, and the next morning the bin was overflowing with oatmeal. The woman was one of the Gentry. And also on a similar path, And also on a similar path, there's the 1850 poem of William Elton, The Fairies, in which Allenham referenced crispy pancakes as being none other than the food of the fairy folk, or as he called them, the little men. He even made a connection to the curious matter of owls. It's very strange. All of it very strange. And with pancakes. So, and these stories are connected in some odd manner as well, it would seem. I mean, wow. What's with the pancakes? I mean, yes, if they've been here for thousands of years, if they're ultra-terrestrials, they know what pancakes are, and yeah, they offer this sort of food. It would certainly do well if they're basically some sort of magical creature, or with what we are reading here, wouldn't it? He even made a connection to the curious matter. Yeah, Alham's poem begins as a follow-up as the airy mountain down the rushing glen. We dared go hunting for fear of little men. We folk, good folk, trooping all together, green jacket, red cap, and white owl's feather. Ooh. Yeah, white owl's feather. Down along the rocky shore, some make their home. They live on crispy pancakes or yellow tide foam. Some in the reeds of the Black Mountain Lake with frogs for their watchdogs all night awake. Wow. This is, wow. Allenham also described it sounds like a classic case of alien abduction and missing time. They stole little Bridget for 7 years long. When she came down again, her friends were all gone. They took her lately back between the night and morrow. They thought that she was fast asleep, but she was dead with sorrow. They have kept her ever since, deep within the lake on a bed of fig leaves, watching till she awake. Precisely what all this means is just but anyone's guess. A tasty meal for the stars, a tiny snack. World of the little people have no answers. This is it is, wow. That story really is interesting, isn't it? Just what are these creatures? Are they aliens? Are they fairies? Certainly, if you look at modern aliens, they look an awful lot like creatures we've seen in our folklore. For God's sakes, the Dogman is a werewolf, if you didn't notice. And Bigfoot could be a troll. Ugh. Not to mention, there are stories of, well, a lot of these creatures are looking like creatures from our folklore and stuff. That's all very, wow. I mean, wow. Let's see. A sword tells of people abducted by fairies. Or should I look at fairies in the mystical, ghostly island of Ireland? Let's go here, folks. By the way, folks, have you hit that like button for me? If you have not, please do so. It helps me fight the algorithm. As well as hit that bell, as of course, to get all my notifications for my future videos and stuff. As well as please go hit that bell and hit the thing where it gives you all the notifications. Make sure you get all of my notifications after you hit the bell, and basically hitting the next thing after that. As well as please go share this video on social media. Shared anywhere. Let's go here, you guys. Ooh, if you're not hit that bell, please do so, folks. Magical places on our planet still exist, located in the cold, churning gray seas 4 miles off the coast of Crunchy's Sligo Island, and it's the tiny uninhabited island of Ishimiri. Just just a square miles in area. It's just a forlorn, wind-swept slash of rocks surrounded by notoriously unpredictable storm-lashed waters, and a long considered a rather remote and forsaken place. Yet, as bleak and forlorn as it seems now, and Shimiri has a colorful history and is steeped in legends that make it out to be a mystical place of magic and wonder, and the realm of mysterious phenomena and fairies. The first settlers of Ishimiri were monks who established a monastery established here in the 6th century by Linson MacDiclin, later known as St. Mulos. It was just a humble, simple settlement at the time, irking out living far from the rest of civilization, living a frugal life in peace. Here they were as if in a whole other world, left to their own devices with no real visitors until Vikings arrived sometime in 795 and ruthlessly attacked the settlement, eventually causing the monks to abandon the island, leaving behind the ruins of a formidable wall, a stone-roofed oratory, some churches, and various other decrepit old structures. Ishimiri would then sit lifeless and forgotten until the 12th century, when a modest secular settlement was started here, which lasted hundreds of years, yet never reaching more than 100 permanent settlers. It was a tough life out there, and eventually the settlers moved away until 1948. The island was abandoned yet again, yet it was during this time of settlement from which many of the mysterious tales of the islands originate. Ooh, look at that. Very cool. The villagers here often spoke of the fairies that lived on the island, which they called Doran Muth, meaning the good people or gentle people, and certain places around the island were known as being their haunts. For instance, there was a place called Pol or Flubber, or the Hole of the Piper, where it was said one could hear ethereal pipe music playing of such a heart-achingly beautiful quality that no mortal person could produce it. Another place called Menjitark was also known for its fairies, who could be seen frolicking about, who did not like visitors getting too close, and so it was mostly avoided by the islanders. There were also reportedly numerous sites known as fairy mounds throughout the island, which are strange, unexplained earthen mounds that have no known origins, but which is the case are said to have been made by fairies of inscrutable reasons. Besides fairies, there is another very odd legend surrounding the island of Ishimiri. It is said that offshore, tucked off away in the mist and rolling tempest ocean, is a mystical island called Brunk Green. According to lore, the mysterious island was only about 1 mile away, yet only sporadically appeared to mortal men before evaporating away, much like the legendary island of Hai Brazil. Area was famous for its rich lobster fishing, and fishermen would frequently come back with tales of seeing the lost island or of witnessing strange phenomena such as ghost lights or glowing waters. One bizarre one very bizarre account of Brent Curran was given by a lobster fisherman by the name of Dormick Haight in 1963. He told the Department of Irish Folklore of a very unusual incident he had concerning Brent Green with his crew as they were fishing the waters, which started with the enormous smell of roses pervading the air around them, he explains. There were 4 of us in the boat, hauling up the pots. It was the same as within a garden of roses. It was like we were within 5 acres of roses, all set within 1 inch of each other, and every man got the scent. Even stranger was the report given by the crew of a lobster fishing vessel that actually saw the island and other weird things. The skipper would relate the tale of how the island had appeared out of nowhere before him, and as he detoured around it, they had all seen the form of an old woman sitting upon its shore knitting, after which the whole island promptly vanished into thin air. Writer Joe McGoran, Joe McGoran, author of Ishimari Island Voices, would say what transpired next. Puzzled, the crew continued Seagull Harbor to deliver their goods. At the end of the day, their business completed. Crew was preparing to leave for their return trip to Teenlin. As they were pulling away from the harbor, they were held by a man carrying on his shoulder a large iron pot used long ago to boil spuds or Indian meal. Approaching the skipper, the man addressed him. Would you mind taking me and this pot across the water with you? He said. The skipper agreed, so the crew and the stranger set off from Seagull Pier for the Tillene. A strong breeze of south wind sails set with the Grinseal yawl at a creaking pace across the water. When they came within a mile of Ishimari, the stranger, without a word, dropped the pot over the side of the boat and jumped in after it. The skipper, sprang at such a foolhardy act, put the boat about immediately to search for the man. He found nothing and eventually was forced to give up the search. Night started to fall, and he reluctantly headed for home. The boat plied on a weekly schedule between Seagull and Tinley on this next trip. Their business in Seagull finished, they were on the point of leaving the pier when who should they see coming down the harbor again but the same man who jumped off their boat at Ishimari. I thought said the skipper that you were down with me the last time I was here, and when we came to a certain spot, you threw the pot out first and jumped out after it. I did say the man's what eye do you see me with? I see you with the right eye, the skipper replied. The stranger walked up and jabbed his thumb into his skipper's right eye, upon which the stranger disappeared from view. And so the story ends. Men go in the boats to fish on Mercdian to this day. If you ask them if strange things still happen there, or if they ever seen the island or smelled the roses there, they will only look at you and with a smile and reply that there are certain things on this earth best left alone. That may be a fair summation of the place, a land that is probably best left alone, the fringes, and which holds forces we are perhaps not ready for, which may even indeed be forever beyond us. It may also, it may always be so that we have such mysterious places looking out over there in the unreachable horizon, and know how much we penetrate into the uncharted places. Okay. That is interesting. Wow. Okay, there's a couple of very lure stories we got from that, knowing what we've seen here. With the guy basically just, you see someone, you see this guy come down, he gets on your ship. Very much like some other stories I've talked about, like ghost stories with the ghostly hitchhiker. There's that as well. But what could that possibly mean? I mean, it very feels much like the ghostly hitchhiker, doesn't it? Let's see. Oh, we got a chat. Bianca Zombie. Dude, nice for you to come in, Bianca Zombie. I love hearing from you. Have some fun. Sit down and listen to some more stories of fairy lore and fairies in general. All right. Let's see. Bunch of weird stories. Let's see, phenomenon. Let's look at this. Or maybe we'll look at that in a moment. Bizarre tales of people addicted by fairies we could look at. Or, I mean, how long is this? It looks like it's a pretty big one. Interesting. Maybe we'll do that in a little bit. We got this other few stories to look at. The story of Beer Fairley Island, most famous witch and fairy friend. Let's take a look at this one. There's a country called Ternig Og, which means the country of young for age and death. Have not found it. And neither tears nor loud laughter have gone near it. Many stories, Ternig Og is the favorite dwelling of the fairies. Miss Shahidin, as I call her, was wrinkled and half blind, had gone barefoot through her lifetime. She had never been to school. She told me because her father could not pay the penny a week it would have him cost. She had never traveled many miles from the parish in her birth, and I am sure had never seen a picture except the sacred ones on chapel walls. She had never heard of it. The great mystic Jacob Brim. Mystic. And yet when the unearthly visitor told her the country of her youth is not far from the place where we live, she had come near to his root idea that the word would stendeth and heaven in the world and are on one another as day and night. In Ireland, the church has raised its monasteries atop the sacred groves and springs which in their virgin state long served as temples for the Irish. But by most accounts, the Irish minded little. Perhaps they thought one God as good as another. Brigid might as well be the Blessed Mary. Suppose, or perhaps their hopes for keeping the old faith. I suppose, or perhaps their hopes of keeping the old faith, like so many hopes in the Irish's history, hinged on a battle that was fatefully lost. As St. Patrick walked around the countryside, told spreading the Gospels to Emerald Island, he met mostly the gentle hospitality of the Irish peasantry with their willing ear for all lore of all kinds, their love of things bright and grand in spirit, and their warm fires of peat and twigs. One druid saw that this whole order and the fate of the Irish was threatened by this new mission from Rome, and so challenged the saint to a battle of magic and power. They met in an open field where billowing clouds traversed across the sun. The druid began the battle by raising into the air high above the meadow until all who watched him had to squint in the sun to see him any longer. St. Patrick ended up by uttering a few words with which the druid faltered and fell from the night light of the sun. His body was broken, the stones below, and his blood joined in with the glover. Although the church had its way with abbeys and crosses, some traditions refused to die. From the very first, the Christian priests had poured any talk of the fair people, that invisible race of sometimes helpful, sometimes wicked folk who have been blessed the Irish with miracles and cursed them with tragedy since before anyone's grandmother could recall. Many poets and all mystic and occult writers in all ages and countries have declared that behind the visible are chains of conscious beings who are not of heaven but of the earth, who have no inherent form but change according to whim. Or the mind that sees them. You can't lift your hand without being influenced by hordes. The visible world is merely their skin, dreams. We go among them and play with them and combat with them, wrote Yeats of the Fairies. Although the priests told all not to believe in such pagan nonsense, themselves were the most afraid to go about at night, time where a troop of fairies might be traveling from their cave to the sea, or from their heat-horn tree to the fields below, or simply dancing to the heavenly music from the twilight to dawn in a circle of moss-covered stones. And though the priests forbid it, their words alone could not hinder the fair people from sometimes bestowing on mortals certain gifts, the sight of things far away, the power to heal and root out evil, or a music so divine that maidens would dance off their toes for the joy of it, or die slowly pining away for it. For the joy of it, Though the gift of flowing music wasn't bestowed on the red-haired lass named Biddy Early. One doubted that she had been touched with the gifts of foresight and healing. She was since earned the title of Ireland's most famous witch. How her power came to her, no one knows. Some say that her For her first husband, she had at least 3 and outlived them all. Came to her after he died and told her her secrets, which gave her the power. Others say she was a seer from birth. Terry Glivin, Lost Magazine, wrote that when Biddy was a girl, Terry Glivin of Lost Magazine wrote, when Biddy was a girl, she spent a great deal of time talking to herself in places where the black horn grows, places like the Rath and Joe Barron's field, besides the farm of Gloon. It's also one of those overgrown stone circles where people used to see faint lights in certain nights of the year. Some say that it was her son, who was coveted by the fairy for his skill at the game of Hurley. Yeats wrote, the people of a fairy cannot even play at Hurley unless they have either side some mortal. The boy was an astonishing player, able to leap like a deer and dodge like a rabbit. That's why they say when he was 8, the fairy took him away, which is a way of saying to their land, a place of everlasting youth, leaving the room to mourn over the lifeless body left behind like so many rags forgotten. It is said the boy returned to Biddy in her grief and granted her a little blue bottle with which to make her living. Biddy, they say, would shake the little bottle and see inside a vision that would answer her many thought brought before her. She never changed in any money for her services, as is the world over with shamans and heroes, but would sometimes take a little bread of tea or more, often whiskey, the abundance of which they say led to the death of all her husbands. To a little girl whose money inherited Biddy's cabin, whose mother inherited Biddy's cabin, she was as good and better to the poor as to the rich, and any poor person passing the road, she'd call and give a cup of tea or a glass of whiskey, too, and bread as they wanted. Little is known of Biddy's early years. She was born to a poor farming family in Country Clare in 1798. That was the year croppers, Wrights, Glenn, Samus, Henry wrote a great poem about the peasants, filled the pockets of the great coats with barley to feed themselves on the run, and they made their final stand at Vilgar Hill, taking scads at cannon. They fell in the thousands. They buried us without a shroud or coffin, and in August the barley grew up out of the grave. Perhaps it is fitting that with tragedies such as the failed Irish Rebellion of 1798 came a blessing to the people, and Biddy was certainly that. She had a little shed in which she would go and consult the fairies, working miraculous miracles, cures, and telling the future of any who would come seek her help. She made many cures with little bottles of potions and prayers and holy water. Often she would warn someone she had given a cure to that they should mind the bottle when crossing such a bridge, or that it would break by such a gate, or that they should not come to any door but their own, or they should lose it. And she was always right. Daniel Curtin told Lady Gregory a story about both her healing and foresight. There's not a man in this countryside over 40 year old that has been with her some time or other. There's a man living in that house over there that was sick at one time, and he went to her and she cured him. But she says you'll have to lose something and don't fret over it. So he had a gray mare, and she was going to foal. And one morning when he went out, he saw that the foal was born and was lying dead by the side of the wall. So he remembered what she said to him and didn't fret. As a deck includes cards of ill fate, so Biddy's tidings were not always happy, and the will of the fairy is not always kind to the earthly folk. There was a woman, Miss Sheridan, told him had something wrong in her with her, and went Biddy, and nothing would do her but to bring my son along with her. And I was vexed when Biddy early saw him. She said, "You'll never far, but wherever you go, you'll not escape them." The woman he went up with died about 6 months after, but he went to America, and he wasn't long there when what was said came true, and he died. They followed him as far as he went. The fairies, that is. Now the priest loathed Betty and often brought fire and brimstone down on anyone seeking her help. A blacksmith told Lady Gregory the priests were against her and used to be taking the cloaks and the baskets from the country people to keep them back from going to her. They even once attempted to put her on trial for witchcraft. She was the last in all of Ireland to be accused in court, but at the last minute, all of the witnesses refused to testify. Many stories are told of how she hexed a priest's horse as as our road past her house. He had been whipping those on the road to see her by having it run into the middle of the nearby river and refused to go either backward or forward. She got out of another stitch with the authorities when an eviction notice was served the night of its execution. She was told by the Fairies, some said it was her dead husband, to tell the sheriff, "Stay where you are." When they come a knocking, she did just that, and all four were struck to their spot in the road as if the feet were cased in stone. After 2 hours, she said, "Be away then," and the enchantment was released. They never again brought ill will to the stout woman's door. Besides curing all manner of sick folk and cattle, a lost fowl or a sour milking cow could mean destruction for a family. She would also trace the source of harmful magic and give the ailing a cure. Sometimes it was a thorn bush planted in a furry road, which was causing hell to fall sick. Sometimes it was a curse or jealousy or ill wort in the mind of someone who may not even know they had the power to do harm. This is a common theme in the Evil Eye lore. I saw Miss Croon, interviewed by Leah Greer, relates to tell about how her healing by Biddy. I was myself digging potatoes on the field beyond, and a woman passed by the road, but I heard her say, "But the pain my head and I fell down and I had to go to my bed for 3 weeks. My mother went then to Betty early. Did you ever hear of her?" And she looked in the blue bottle she had and she said my name, and she saw me standing before her and knew all about me and said, "Your daughter was digging potatoes with her husband in the field." And a woman passed by and said, "It is good herself is with as straight as a man." But for I was a young woman at that time, she gave my mother a bottle for me, and I took 3 drinks. Took 3 drinks of it. The bed, and then I got up as well as I was before. A popular form of evil spell in Ireland was the use of a dead man's hand, infamous hand of used the world over for all types of theft and deceit, to steal the butter right from the churn of milk, right from the crow, from the cow, crow. Betty would find the culprit and stop the theft. A popular way of doing this was with the inflicted family to put red-hot coals beneath their churn, at which point the thieving conjurer would run up to the cottage in a terrible ruckus, screaming that they were being burned alive. This practice is further evidenced by Betty's demonic nature. It is with most ancient cultures. There are 2 types of magic workers, the good and the evil. The evil always work for their own benefit, seeking wealth and glory at the cost of others. Invades their hearts with infliction. That void is never filled. The favorite trick of a grieved shaman is to bewitch inspecting folk with sickness to cause them to seek the enchanter's help, at which point they would simply remove their own curse and collect the bounty. This is one reason that good shamans never accept money for their services and are obliged to be generous with what they have and humble with what they don't. Otherwise, they might be accused of seeking wealth for the expense of others' suffering. It's a shame that the church failed to recognize the distinction and early on put the black mark of witch on all those wise men and women who used herbs in mountains and valleys, as well as the prayers and visions throughout which the spirits guided them to cure the ill and attempt to bring a heavenly grace into the earthly realm, a task which we all may hope is still not in vain. Lady Gregory's recorded the words of St. Macabe, priests who were against her, but they were wrong. How could that be evil, doing that with all charity and kindness and healing? But old cottage is in ruins now. The stone walls broken and the thatched roof caved in. But when Terry Gillivan visited its remains not so long ago, he found that not everyone had forgotten this miraculous woman. Someone had dropped a petty red kerchief over a hole in the stone and wall there, where a window had been. On the still in the needles and the moss, there was an offerings of the sort that people used to leave in saints' wells. They were a pen, a little bottle, and some coins, a package of stamps and ribbon. These strange such tokens are important in humble folk traditions. Ribbon. A few simple pins in a bottle were thought to keep evil spirits away. A coin thrown into a sacred spring brought good fortune, and even today a hopeful seeker might cast a penny into a wishing well. Biddy herself worked untold miracles, and for nothing by time a little blue bottle and their help, of course. The emblems of this healthy and humble fairy faith are not of golden rings and grand cathedrals, but of butter and bread, thimble and tea. Lay not up your treasures, as they say. That's something to keep in mind, as both the pump and the pickling of the Pope, that 3 times, and the celebration of St. Patrick's Day crossed our path this spring. It looks interesting. That was a good little thing there. We learned some lore. How far are we in this little thing? 44 minutes in. Dr. McCuffins, what's up? We're talking about fairy lore tonight. People who deal with fairies, people who have been abducted by fairies or aliens, for stuff, the story we just, well, other stories as well. We're going to keep looking at some more stuff. Let's talk about this. Deathbed fairy sightings? Maybe. Should I look at this one, folks? Maybe I should look at this over here. The sort of tales of people abducted by fairies. For centuries, there have been legends and lore about mysterious spiritual entities, commonly referred to as fairies, also known as fairies, the fae, and numerous other names. They permeate countless stories and legends since time unremembered, with appearances, origins, and as the different cultures and people who believe in them, most commonly depicted in popular culture as simmering little flying forest spirits, nymphs with wings. They also mostly seen by the mainstream as benevolent, playful creatures, yet looking into the lore of fairies, they are not always so, and stories about the darker side of these creatures, including mischief, murder, and kidnappings. One frequent theme in fairy lore is that they have a well-known reputation for abducting human beings, and far from mere legend and lore, this has the reported happening on many real-time times over the centuries. In some traditions of fairy abductions, the little folk were said to leave behind one entity called a changeling, which was a fairy imposter, merely looked like the person who was abducted, to act as like a placeholder and take the abductee's place. In such a case, from March 1895, a young woman named Bridget Galley disappeared in Ireland. Yeah, this was talking about a woman who, Clary, this might, maybe we should read this first. And after an extensive search for the woman, her body was finally found not far from her home. Police would finger husband Mike Clearly, her father Patrick Willand, Aunt Mary Cullen, her cousins Patrick William and John Doone as the killers. But under questioning, they would weave a very strange tale indeed. According to them, the real Bridget had in fact been abducted by fairies. Yeah. Apparently, there's a good story about this. Well, should I read this? This might be the story about how these guys ended up killing this woman, and people saying that was just nonsense. They insisted that their daughter and wife they killed was a changeling and not the real woman they loved, but they ended up killing her. They were uncovered. In fact, they uncovered when the creature became very ill for no reason. Then they tied up the changeling, tortured it in order to find out where the real Bridget had been taken to, but it died from its injuries. According to them, the police had found the changeling's body and not that of the real Bridget. It was a colorful story, but the police weren't buying it. They were charged with murder. In most cases, the person is just sort of whisked away, and this often happens to the very young. Another case, if you want to know about the story about those people who were basically accused of murder and basically were sentenced, they basically thought this woman who just suddenly took ill and was just dying on them, they thought she was a fairy imposter, a changeling. So they, as I said, they ended up torturing her to death. There's a lot of stories. There's a lot of that. That basically was a very big thing. Those people were charged, and most likely they did end up killing a woman. But then again, how would you know if a changeling? Can you tell a changeling from the real person? They had a body, after all, so you can't really be sure. Now let's see. Often happens to young. Another case concerns a young woman with the name of Annie, who also from Ireland, according to an account in 1909, edition of the Preston Herald. Well, Preston, huh? Annie McIntyre, a venerable country dairy woman, has a sublime faith in the fairies, which being examined at the meeting of the Limerick Princely Committee. As to her age, she fixed the name of her birth as Halls in 1839, giving her for her recollection of the fact that startling reason that she had been stolen by the fairies. In reply to the chairman, the woman said she was certain of her abduction by the fairies as she was alive. After carrying off the infant, she continued. The wee people indulged in revels and dancing in the weird karaoke at the wood, which was fortunately overheard by her brother when returning to Cumdora. The brother had took book a Bible, difficult difficulties to the fairies being frightened off by a penny dirtful, which he threw into the wood and scared the fairies when he lifted his baby sister in his arms and carried her back in triumph. Further questioning, the witness said her mother relative her mother's relatives were overjoyed at her safe return and gave themselves up to feasting and merriment. This was the only incident by which witnesses were able to determine her age, which no record appeared in the census 1841 of that in 1850. Indeed, babies are traditionally prime targets for fairies, and in order to protect their infant, people would often sprinkle them with holy water or hung bars of a rod of iron over their cribs, as iron was said to be ward off fairies, with even adults carrying around iron when venturing into fairies' territory. This was among many precautions mothers would take to protect both themselves and their babies from fairies. 20th century fairy researcher said of this. The fairies were wont to take away infants and their mothers, and many precautions were taken to safeguard them until purification and baptism took place, when the fairy power became ineffective, placing iron above the bed, burning leather in the room, giving mother and child the milk of a cow, which are eaten of the modern pearlwort vulgars, a plan of virtue, and similar means were taken to ensure their safety. If the watching woman neglected these precautions, the mother and child or both were spirited away to the fairy bower. This does not seem to always work, though, and in another account we have a case where the site of Irish Central Farm witness called Grace, she writes, "Don't believe in fairy abductions. My granny would have a sit down with you and soon get you straight from the very day of their birth. Granny's parents would carefully lay iron fire broke across the basket she slept in. They were believers, you see, and good people. Well, wasn't everyone back then? But changed now. There are fewer who believe. Who knows? Maybe the good people like it, and that way. My granny thinks so, and she says she should know. I have lived one foot in our world and the other foot in theirs. She says, you see, when Granny was but a few months old, the good people tried to steal her away without a drop of whiskey on her breath. She'll tell you that she was asleep in her wee basket when there was a commotion out back of her parents' cottage. They lived in country Limerick at that time. It was a farm with many sheep, she says. And anyway, hell had broken loose with the twine sheep and dogs, and Granny's mom and pop upped and ran outside to see the damage as it happened. There was nothing to see, nothing at all. It had been nothing but a bluster, for the sheep and dogs were all calmly dozy, which was strange in itself. Granny's ma'am was pretty canny, and she hurried it back to the cottage to find Granny still wrapped in her blanket, laying on the threshold at the front door, fast asleep across the room from the basket. When she was older, Granny was told by her parents that the good people had distracted them so they could steal her away, for she was touched, having one blue eye and one green, you see, only they couldn't get her out from the cottage on account she'd been baptized. Granny will tell you that iron bar did nothing to keep the good folk from reaching in her basket, and what's more, it wasn't true her being baptized. It's what her parents told everyone who asked. But in truth, she was yet to be baptized, and only a good day or two after the visit, as Granny calls it, her parents took her on a quiet to the priest, nor for the job to get done. So we can only guess that the good people dropped Granny to the ground when they heard her man approaching. I think Granny enjoys telling the story and wears it as a kind of badge. Actually, is remarked by many who have known. That is very weird. Very, very weird. Let me get. All right. That she has lived a charmed life on account of her touch by the good people. There could be something to that. She's nearing 100 years old, after all, and as bright and feisty as ever before. Not all such reductions are of babies, but babies. Victims are typically young, and some of the strangest reports of fairy abductions come from who have managed to come back and tell the tale. A very weird earlier report also has to do with what is called a fairy circle, a sort of portal between the land of the Fae and our reality, which is this again supposedly existed near the farm of Flynn, Vale Rath, South Wales, 1755. Two servants on the farm, a Ray's Ap Morgan and Lirin Walter, were walking towards the farm one evening when Ray stopped and told his companion he could hear music playing, although rarely and could hear nothing. Ray told Laurelian to continue back home while he went to go search for who was playing the music and talk to them. It was all very good since only Reyes could hear the alleged music, and Leon suspected he was just trying to get out of work, finally just leaving his friend to head home. Uh, uh. When morning came, Rice was nowhere to be seen, so Lauren told his boss what had happened the previous night. The area was searched, and they even searched the nearby ale house, but there was no sign of Rice, and his suspicion began to fall on Lauren that he had done something to him. This would continue for a full year before the story found its way to a local farmer who might have to do with the fairies. He asked Lauren to take him and some friends to the exact spot where Ray's had disappeared, and the farmer claimed he was a fairy circle and that Ray's had been snatched away within it. That moment, Lauren could allegedly hear harp music that no one else could, and the farmer noticed that the servant's foot was partly within the circle. When all present placed their foot within the circle, they found that they too could hear the music, and they could also hear little child-sized figures dancing around along with the missing Rays. Lauren then grabbed his friend and pulled him out of the circle, after which Rays had said he wanted to dance a little more, as he had just gone there. When asked what he meant, Rays claimed to have been there for scarcely 5 minutes, despite the fact that the whole year had passed. Indeed, he had no inkling at all that he had been gone for so long, and he also found himself unable to clearly remember his time with the little people in that circle. The next morning, the circle was checked to find that it was turned down and filled with tiny footprints the size of a person's thumb. Oddly, after leaving the circle, Ray's health would rapidly deteriorate and he would die not long after. What happened here, some of those cases can be, quote, harrowing, says the account written in 1810, The Fairy Faith in Selected Countries. The case revolves around a witness who says that when he was a boy, he was out with his brother and cousin, and when they were almost abducted by a group of fairies, he said it was a bizarre experience. One day, just before sunset in midsummer, I, a boy then, when brother and I, cousin and myself, were gathering bilberries, whole bilberries up by the rocks at the back of it there, when all at once we heard music. We heard around the rocks, and there were within a few 100 feet of 6-8 of the gentle folk and dancing when they saw us. A little woman dressed in all in red came running from them towards us, and she struck my cousin across the face with what seemed to be a green rush. We ran for home as hard as we could, and when my cousin reached the house, she fell dead. Father saddled the horse and went for Father Ryan. When Father Ryan arrived, he put his stole around his neck and began praying over my cousin, reading his psalms and striking her with his stole, and in that way brought her back. He said if she had not caught hold of my brother, she would have been taken forever. From the same book in the story, a man who tells frightening encounters with what he calls the Gentry, another word for fairy. One day, as he was out near a place called Ben Bulbin, had a curious encounter with a fairy that seemed about to abduct him. He says the rather odd series of events. When I was young, I often used to go out into the mountains over there to fish for trout or to hunt, and it was in January on a cold, dry day when carrying my gun that I and my friend with me, as we were walking toward Ben Bulbin, saw one of the Gentry for the first time. I knew who it was, for I had heard the Gentry described ever since. I remember, for this was when dressed in blue with a headdress adorned what seemed to be frills. When he came to us, he said to me in a sweet and silvery voice, the sooner you come to this mountain, the better. The young lady here wants to take you away. Then he told us not to fire off our guns because the Gentry disliked being disturbed by the noise, and he seemed to be like a soldier of the Gentry on guard. And as we were leaving the mountains, he told us not to look back, and we didn't. Another time I was alone trout fishing in nearly the same region when I heard a voice say, "It is barefooted and fishing." Then there came a whistle-like music and a noise like the beating of a drum, and soon one of the Gentry came and talked to me for a half an hour. He said, "Your mother will die in 11 months, and do not let her die anointed." And she did die within 11 months. And as he was going away, he warned me, "You must be in the house before sunset. Do not delay. Do not delay. They can do nothing to you until I get back in the castle." As I found out afterwards, he was going to take me, but hesitated because he did not want to leave my mother alone. After these warnings, I was always afraid to go to the mountains, but lately I've been told that I could go if I took a friend with me. In some cases, people have been reported as being gone for a length of time, only to somehow find their way back, usually dazed, confused, and with no clear memory of what was happened to them. One report says the fairy faith in certain countries speaks of this and explains how something about what is called fairyland as being a place where time runs differently and which has a way of preventing the abductee from being able to speak of it. It explains persons is a short trance state of 2 or 3 days duration is said to have been away for the fairies enjoying the festival. The festival may very well be material in its nature, or it may be purely spiritual. Sometimes one may go through to fairy for an hour or two, or one may remain there for 7, 14, or 21 years. The mind of a person coming out of fairyland, usually a blank as to what has been seen and done there. Another idea is that the person knows well enough all about fairyland, but is prevented from communicating that knowledge. A certain woman from whom I knew said she had forgotten all about her experience in fairy, but a friend who heard her objected and said she did remember and wouldn't tell. A man may remain awake at night to watch one who has been into fairyland and see if that one holds communication with the fairies. Others say in such a case that the fairies know you are in the alert and will not be discovered. Similarly, we have a case of the ancient origins, which relate to the bizarre ordeal of a woman who disappeared, what is called a fairy fort, usually a mound carrying of rocks or a boulder that draws in fairies and has a great significance for them. The report reads, finally, as an example of the darker aspect of fairy encounters, this account from Irish folklore demonstrates the upset and the confusion which many feel before they can speak about what they believe happened to them. In this case, a family happened to live close to an ancient fairy fort, and one morning, as a woman is using a spinning wheel, she noticed a tiny person standing by the door of the house. When the woman stood up and walked to the door to investigate, she was taken away by a group of small people. When the family arrived at home and noticed and had been vanished, and they searched everywhere in the vicinity, found no sign of her. They searched her drains, the ditches, and even the fairy fort itself. It was on the 3rd day of her disappearance that one of her family was walking by the fort when they saw the aunt kneeling next to it. She had been vanished while holding a carving knife, and this was struck in the ground next to her. The aunt could not speak for days, and after her return, and it was only then that the family learned of the fairy abduction. There are countless other reports along with these lines. All very interesting. I think this is all very interesting. What happens to people, huh? Why do they disappear? Where do they go? And by the way, folks, thank you for coming into this Scumdog's Kennel. Subscribe to my channel, read comics, they're bad for you. Remember, there is misspelled. All right, so there's that. Make sure you're still subscribed, and let's see, make sure you're still, leave some comments down below. I love to hear from you guys, and please basically hit that like button for me, as well as please go and subscribe to Stitch Together Picks. Stitch Together Picks is a YouTube channel that deserves far more subscribers. You're going to love his reviews of movies. They are just great. As well as please go and share this video on social media. Share it on Twitter. Share it on Facebook. Timothy Olsen, what's up, man? I've been talking about fairies tonight, fairy lore and stuff like that. How people get abducted by the fairies and stuff. Been talking about reading those stories and looking at various ones. They're all very interesting. All right. What else? Oh, yeah. Also, please go and subscribe to Creepy Little Book. Creepy Little Book is like the Art Bell radio show. He releases small videos where he talks about high strangeness, but he also does live streams every night. On weekdays, he live streams at 12:30 a.m., and on weekends, he live streams at 11 o'clock p.m. He talks about aliens and ghosts, and you learn so much from his live streams. They are so good. Go and subscribe to Creepy Little Book. As well as, please remember, folks, I'll be back again tomorrow around 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock, 8 or 10 for another live stream, so be sure to come back again then. I'm Chris Williams from the Scumdog's Kennel. Thank you all for joining me.